The grand ballroom of the riverside estate glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Wealthy guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled around tables draped in silk, sipping champagne that cost more than most people earned in a week. At the center of it all stood Marcus Wellington, a self-made millionaire who had built his fortune in real estate. Tonight was his 50th birthday celebration, and he had spared no expense to remind everyone of his success. Sarah Mitchell moved quietly through the crowd, balancing a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. Her black uniform was simple and pressed, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had been working as a waitress for the catering company for 3 years now, taking whatever events came her way to make ends meet. The pay was decent, and the tips at high-end parties like this could sometimes help cover her mounting bills. She navigated between guests with practiced ease, offering smiles and polite nods as she served. Most of the wealthy attendees barely noticed her, treating her like part of the furniture. Sarah had grown used to being invisible at these events. It was easier that way. She could do her job, collect her pay, and go home without drama. Marcus Wellington stood near the grand piano that occupied one corner of the ballroom, laughing loudly at something one of his business partners had said. He was a tall man with graying hair and an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His expensive watch caught the light as he gestured dramatically, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Sarah approached their group with her tray, offering the carefully arranged appetizers. Marcus glanced at her briefly, then did a double-take. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her face. "Wait a moment," he said, his voice cutting through the conversation. "I know you from somewhere." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She kept her professional smile in place. "I don't think so, sir. I've worked many events, perhaps you've seen me at another party." Marcus snapped his fingers, a grin spreading across his face. No, I remember now. Eastside High School, right? You were a few years behind me." Sarah's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected anyone from her old neighborhood to be at an event like this. Eastside High had been in one of the poorest parts of the city, a world away from the wealth surrounding her now. "Yes," she admitted quietly, hoping he would drop it, but Marcus seemed delighted by the recognition. He turned to his companions. "This is Sarah Mitchell." Her family lived in that rundown apartment complex on 5th Street. "I remember now." He looked back at her with mock sympathy. "Tough times back then, weren't they? Your mother worked 2 jobs, if I recall." Sarah felt heat rising to her cheeks. The other guests were staring now, their expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. She wanted nothing more than to disappear. "I should get back to work," she said softly, starting to move away. "Wait," Marcus called out, grabbing her arm. His grip was firm, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't rush off. I want to catch up. Tell me, what happened to those big dreams you had? You were always talking about becoming a concert pianist, weren't you?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Yes, she had dreamed of becoming a pianist once. She had been talented, even won a few local competitions in high school. Her music teacher had told her she had real potential, but life had other plans. Her father had died suddenly during her senior year, leaving her mother struggling with medical debt. College became impossible. The piano lessons stopped. Dreams got buried under the weight of survival. "Things changed," Sarah said simply, trying to pull her arm free. Marcus released her but wasn't done. His eyes gleamed with what looked like amusement. "That's a shame. Really tragic." He gestured toward the grand piano. "We have this beautiful instrument here, and nobody's played it all evening. Why don't you show everyone what you can do?" Sarah's eyes widened. "No, thank you. I really need to work." "Oh, come on," Marcus pressed, his voice growing louder. Other guests were turning to watch now, drawn by the commotion. "Don't be shy. You used to be so proud of your playing. What was it you said in high school? That music was going to be your ticket out?" The cruelty in his tone was thinly veiled. Sarah realized with growing horror what he was doing. This wasn't about reminiscing or genuine interest. Marcus Wellington wanted to humiliate her. He wanted to remind her and everyone else in the room that she had failed, that her dreams had died, that she was now just a waitress serving people who had succeeded where she had not. "I haven't played in years," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then this is perfect," Marcus announced to the growing crowd. A little rusty performance from an old classmate. "Come on, everyone wants to hear you play, don't you?" He looked around at the other guests who murmured uncertainly. The catering manager appeared at Sarah's elbow. his expression apologetic but firm. "If the host wants you to play, you should play," he said quietly. "We can't afford to upset Mr. Wellington." Sarah felt trapped. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her tray. The walk to the piano felt like miles, every eye in the ballroom following her movement. She could hear whispers spreading through the crowd, explaining who she was, why Marcus had singled her out. The piano bench felt foreign as she sat down. The keys seemed to mock her with their pristine ivory surface. How long had it been since she had touched a piano? 5 years, 6? She couldn't even remember. Her fingers hovered over the keys, shaking. Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed, that same cruel smile on his face. He was enjoying this. To him, this was entertainment. A poor girl who had failed at her dreams, now forced to perform for the amusement of the wealthy elite. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Humiliation burned in her chest, but beneath it something else stirred. A memory of the girl she used to be. The girl who had loved music more than anything. The girl who had felt most alive when her fingers danced across the keys. She placed her hands on the piano and began to play. The first notes came out hesitant and uncertain. Sarah's fingers felt stiff, unpracticed. She started with a simple piece, something she remembered from her high school days. A basic classical melody that she hoped would satisfy Marcus and let her escape this nightmare quickly. Behind her, she could hear snickering from some of the guests. Someone whispered loudly enough for her to hear that this was painful to watch. Marcus's voice cut through the scattered laughter. "Is that the best you can do? I thought you were supposed to be talented." The words stung, but something shifted inside Sarah. Her fingers paused on the keys. She thought about all the years that had passed, all the struggles and sacrifices. She thought about her mother working herself to exhaustion. She thought about the piano in their old apartment that had been sold to pay for her father's funeral. She thought about every dream she had carefully folded up and put away because survival had to come first. But those dreams hadn't died. They had just been waiting. Sarah straightened her back. Her hands moved to a different position on the keys. If Marcus wanted a performance, she would give him one he would never forget. She began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding pieces in classical repertoire. The change was immediate and stunning. The hesitant notes transformed into a powerful, cascading waterfall of sound that filled the entire ballroom. Sarah's fingers flew across the keys with precision and passion, executing complex runs and dramatic chords that made the piano sing. The muscle memory had not forgotten. Her hands remembered what her heart had never stopped feeling. The laughter died instantly. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Every person in the ballroom turned to stare at the woman they had dismissed as just another server. The music swelled and soared, capturing the raw emotion of Rachmaninoff's composition with breathtaking intensity. Sarah poured everything into her playing, every hurt, every loss, every moment of quiet strength that had gotten her through the hardest years of her life. Marcus's smug expression began to falter. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps a stumbling attempt at a simple tune. Instead, he was witnessing artistry that rivaled professional concert pianists. The other guests stood transfixed, some with mouths slightly open in shock. A woman near the front had tears streaming down her face, moved by the sheer beauty of what she was hearing. Sarah didn't see any of them. Her eyes were closed, lost in the music. This was the language she spoke most fluently, the place where she had always been most herself. The years melted away. She wasn't a waitress in a borrowed uniform. She was an artist, a musician, someone who could create beauty that transcended circumstances and status. The technical passages that would challenge even skilled pianists flowed from her fingers effortlessly. She navigated the thundering crescendos and delicate diminuendos with complete control. The piano became an extension of her soul, expressing things that words never could. When she reached a particularly complex section that required her hands to cross and leap across the keyboard in rapid succession, several musicians in the crowd gasped audibly. This was not the playing of someone rusty or out of practice. This was mastery, pure and undeniable. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. His attempt to humiliate Sarah was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of confirming his superiority, he had inadvertently revealed her extraordinary talent to everyone present. Some of the guests were starting to look at him with confusion and disapproval, wondering why he had tried to embarrass someone so gifted. Sarah transitioned into the second movement, the famous romantic theme that had been featured in countless films and performances. She played it with heartbreaking tenderness, each note perfectly weighted and timed. The melody spoke of love and loss, of beauty found in sorrow, of strength born from suffering. It was impossible to listen without being moved. A prominent music critic who happened to be at the party pulled out his phone, recording the performance. He recognized immediately that he was witnessing something special. This wasn't just competent playing. This was the kind of raw talent that appeared once in a generation. The catering manager stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, his earlier instruction forgotten. He had expected Sarah to play a simple song and return to work. Now he realized that he was watching something extraordinary, something that would be talked about for years to come. Other waitstaff had stopped their work entirely, drawn by the music. They stood along the walls, holding trays they had forgotten about, listening with the same rapt attention as the wealthy guests. The music was a great equalizer, speaking to something universal in everyone present, regardless of their bank account or social status. Sarah built toward the climax of the piece, her fingers attacking the keys with controlled power. The music surged like an ocean wave, building in intensity until it felt like the entire ballroom was vibrating with sound. The chandelier crystals seemed to chime in harmony. The very air felt charged with emotion. Then, with perfect timing and control, she brought the piece to its conclusion. The final notes rang out clear and true, then faded into silence that felt sacred. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The last echo of the piano died away, and still the crowd stood frozen. Sarah opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. Her hands rested gently on the keys. She looked down at them, almost surprised by what they had just accomplished. Then she heard it. A single person began to clap, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. People were on their feet, giving her a standing ovation. The woman who had been crying was applauding so hard her hands must have hurt. The music critic was shaking his head in amazement, still recording. Several guests were shouting, "Brava!" in the traditional classical music accolade. Sarah stood up from the bench, overwhelmed by the response. Her legs felt shaky. She had not expected this. She had only wanted to prove to Marcus and to herself that she was more than what circumstances had made her appear. Marcus stood near the piano, his face flushed. The applause continued, growing louder. Someone called out, "Who is this woman? Why haven't we heard of her before?" Another voice added, "That was absolutely magnificent." Sarah looked at Marcus. There was no triumph in her expression, no desire to gloat. She simply looked at him with quiet dignity, letting her talent speak for itself. The humiliation he had intended for her had become his own. The applause continued for what felt like minutes. Sarah stood beside the piano, unsure of what to do next. She had never performed for a crowd this size, never experienced this level of response to her music. Her heart pounded, but this time not from fear or humiliation. It was exhilaration mixed with disbelief. An elderly gentleman in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd toward her. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the authority of someone used to commanding attention. He reached Sarah and extended his hand. "Thomas Brennan," he introduced himself. "I'm the director of the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra." That was absolutely extraordinary. "Where did you study?" Sarah shook his hand, still dazed. "I didn't, not formally. I had local teachers growing up, but I never went to conservatory." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "You're self-taught? That makes what you just did even more remarkable. Do you have representation? An agent?" Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "No, sir. I work as a waitress. I haven't performed professionally in years." "That's criminal," Thomas said firmly. He pulled a business card from his pocket. "Call my office Monday morning. We have openings for guest soloists this season. I want you to audition properly, but based on what I just heard, I'd be honored to have you perform with us." Before Sarah could respond, others were pressing forward. A woman in a glittering gold dress introduced herself as the owner of a prestigious music venue in the city. A man in his 30s explained that he produced classical music albums and wanted to discuss a recording contract. A journalist for a major newspaper asked if she would be willing to be interviewed. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. These were people she would never have imagined speaking to in her normal life. And now they were handing her cards, asking for her contact information, treating her like someone important. Across the room, Marcus Wellington watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. His birthday party, which was supposed to celebrate his achievements and importance, had been completely overshadowed. People who had been trying to impress him minutes ago were now ignoring him entirely, focused instead on the waitress he had tried to embarrass. One of his business associates approached him, a puzzled expression on his face. "Marcus, why did you try to humiliate that woman? She's clearly incredibly talented." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I was just trying to give her a chance to showcase her skills," he said defensively, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It looked like you were trying to mock her," the associate said bluntly. "Not a good look, Marcus. Not a good look at all." Other guests were whispering now, and Marcus caught fragments of their conversations. They weren't talking about his business success or the lavish party he had thrown. They were talking about how he had treated Sarah, how cruel his setup had seemed, how his plan had backfired spectacularly. Sarah managed to extract herself from the crowd of admirers, her hands full of business cards. She needed air, needed a moment to process what had just happened. She slipped out onto the estate's terrace where the night was cool and quiet compared to the chaos inside. She leaned against the stone railing, looking up at the stars. Her hands were still trembling, but now it was from adrenaline. She had played the piano again, really played it for the first time in years. And she hadn't just played, she had soared. All the muscle memory, all the passion, all the skill she thought she had lost had come flooding back the moment she needed it. The terrace door opened behind her. Sarah tensed, expecting another music industry professional or curious guest. Instead, it was Marcus Wellington. He walked toward her slowly, his earlier confidence notably diminished. "That was quite a performance," he said, his voice lacking its previous smugness. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She looked at him, this man who had tried to use her pain for entertainment, who had wanted to remind her of her failures in front of a room full of strangers. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. "What did you gain by trying to humiliate me?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Finally, he said, "I don't know. I saw you and I remembered you from high school. You were always so confident about your talent, so sure you were going somewhere. And when I saw you here as a waitress, I guess I wanted to prove that I had been right to doubt you." "Right to doubt me?" Sarah repeated, her voice harder now. "You barely knew me in high school." "We weren't friends. We weren't anything to each other." "I know," Marcus admitted. He leaned against the railing a few feet away from her, staring out at the manicured gardens. "I think I was jealous, actually. Even back then, you had this passion, this dream. You knew what you wanted. I just wanted to be rich. And I am rich now. But inside that ballroom when you played, you had something I've never had. Real talent. Real purpose." Sarah was surprised by the admission. She had expected defensiveness or more cruelty, not this glimpse of vulnerability. "Being rich isn't a crime," she said after a moment. "But using it to hurt people is. You tried to make me feel small because you could. Because you had the power in that situation." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're right, I did. And I was wrong." He turned to look at her. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. What you did in there, that music, it was beautiful. You deserved better than how I treated you." Sarah studied his face, trying to determine if the apology was genuine. She saw regret there and shame, but also something else, perhaps a recognition that wealth and success hadn't filled whatever emptiness he carried. "I accept your apology," Sarah said finally. "But you should know that you didn't humiliate me tonight. You reminded me of who I really am. You reminded me that I'm more than my circumstances. So in a strange way, thank you." Marcus looked stunned by her response. Before he could say anything else, the terrace door opened again. Thomas Brennan stepped out, looking relieved to find Sarah. "There you are. I wanted to make sure you were serious about that audition. We have an opening for a featured soloist in 3 weeks. Brahms Piano Concerto No. 1. Are you interested?" Sarah's breath caught. Brahms was one of her favorite composers. To perform one of his concertos with a professional orchestra would be a dream beyond anything she had imagined when she woke up that morning. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I'm very interested." "Excellent," Thomas beamed. "Call my office Monday. We'll arrange everything." He nodded politely to Marcus and went back inside. Sarah looked down at the business card in her hand, Thomas Brennan's name embossed in elegant script. This was real. This was actually happening. One performance, one moment of courage had opened doors she had thought were permanently closed. Monday morning arrived with Sarah sitting nervously outside Thomas Brennan's office at the Symphony headquarters. The building itself was magnificent, with high ceilings, marble columns, and walls decorated with photographs of legendary musicians who had performed there over the decades. She had walked past this building hundreds of times in her life, never imagining she would one day be inside it as anything other than a tourist. She wore her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit she had bought years ago for job interviews. It was nothing compared to the designer clothes she had seen at Marcus's party, but it was clean and professional. Her hands clutched her worn leather portfolio containing the only sheet music she still owned, pieces she had saved from her teenage years. The door to Thomas's office opened and his assistant, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled at her. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Brennan will see you now." Sarah stood, her legs shaky, and walked into the office. Thomas was seated behind a large mahogany desk, but he immediately stood and came around to greet her warmly. "Sarah, I'm so glad you called. Please sit down." He gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "Can I get you anything?" "Coffee? Water?" "Water would be nice, thank you," Sarah said, her mouth suddenly dry. Thomas poured her a glass from a pitcher on his desk, then settled into his own chair. "I've been thinking about your performance all weekend. I even watched the video that someone posted online. It already has over 1 million views, did you know that?" Sarah's eyes widened. 1 million? I had no idea. "The clip is going viral," Thomas explained. "People are calling it one of the most moving performances they've ever heard. The story behind it makes it even more powerful. The waitress who stunned a millionaire's party. It's capturing people's imagination." Sarah wasn't sure how to feel about that. She didn't want to be famous for being poor or for the circumstances of that night. She wanted to be recognized for her music, nothing else. Thomas seemed to sense her discomfort. "The story brought attention, but it's your talent that will sustain interest. Let's talk about the audition. The Brahms' first piano concerto is technically demanding. Have you played it before?" "I learned parts of it years ago," Sarah admitted, "but I've never performed the complete piece with an orchestra. I'll need time to practice. The problem is I don't have access to a piano right now." Thomas frowned. "That is a problem. How have you been practicing?" "I haven't," Sarah said quietly. "Not in years. I couldn't afford lessons and I had to sell my piano. The performance at the party was the first time I'd touched a piano in almost 6 years." Thomas sat back in his chair, clearly amazed. "You performed at that level after 6 years without practice? Sarah, do you understand how extraordinary that is? Most pianists would lose significant skill after even 6 months away from the instrument." Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Music was always the one thing I was good at. It was like breathing for me. I guess some things stay with you." "Well, we need to get you access to a practice space immediately," Thomas said decisively. He picked up his phone and made a quick call. "Janet, can you arrange for Studio 3 to be available for Sarah Mitchell? Starting today. Yes, unlimited access. She's preparing for the Brahms audition. Thanks." He hung up and smiled at Sarah. "Studio 3 is one of our practice rooms. It has an excellent grand piano. You'll have a key card that gives you 24-hour access. Practice as much as you need." Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me by delivering an amazing audition," Thomas said warmly. "The audition is scheduled for 2 weeks from today." "Think you can be ready?" "I'll be ready," Sarah promised. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah lived and breathed the Brahms concerto. She would finish her waitressing shifts, often not getting home until midnight, then head to the Symphony building to practice. The security guards got used to seeing her arrive at 1 in the morning, hauling her bag of sheet music and looking exhausted but determined. The practice room became her sanctuary. The piano there was far superior to any instrument she had played before. The action was responsive, the tone rich and warm. She worked through the concerto movement by movement, tackling the technical challenges systematically while trying to understand the emotional arc of the piece. Brahms had written the concerto during a difficult period in his life, and that struggle was woven into the music. Sarah found she could relate to that pain, that sense of fighting through adversity. She poured her own experiences into her interpretation, making the music deeply personal. Her mother noticed the change in her. Sarah came home exhausted but energized, talking about musical phrases and interpretations in a way she hadn't done since she was a teenager. Her mother watched with mixed emotions, happy to see her daughter's passion reignited but worried about the disappointment if things didn't work out. What if the audition doesn't go well? Her mother asked one evening. What if this doesn't lead anywhere? Sarah paused in eating her dinner. Then at least I'll know I tried. For years I told myself I had given up music because I had to, because life didn't give me a choice. But the truth is I stopped fighting for it. This audition, this opportunity, it's my chance to fight again. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then fight hard, baby. Fight with everything you have. The day of the audition arrived too quickly. Sarah stood backstage at the Symphony Hall, listening to another pianist perform before her. The woman was technically proficient, hitting all the right notes with precision, but there was something missing. The music felt mechanical, correct but not alive. When it was Sarah's turn, she walked onto the stage to find Thomas and 4 other symphony officials seated in the audience. The orchestra members were present too, ready to accompany her if she passed the initial solo portion of the audition. Sarah sat at the grand piano center stage. The hall was vast, with rows of empty velvet seats rising up into the shadows. She had never performed in a space this large. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then she placed her hands on the keys and remembered why she was here. Not for fame or money or validation, for the music itself, for the pure joy of creating something beautiful. She began to play the opening of the Brahms concerto, her fingers finding the notes with confidence. The solo piano introduction was lyrical and expansive, setting the emotional tone for the entire piece. Sarah played it with tenderness and longing, each phrase carefully shaped and colored. Thomas leaned forward in his seat, completely absorbed. The other judges exchanged glances, impressed. One of them, a renowned conductor named Margaret Chen, nodded slowly. She had auditioned hundreds of pianists in her career. She knew exceptional talent when she heard it. Sarah moved through the first movement's exposition, navigating the technical passages with ease while maintaining the musical narrative. When it came time for the orchestra to join in, Thomas gave a signal. The musicians raised their instruments and began to play. This was the moment Sarah had dreamed about as a teenager. Playing with a full orchestra, feeling the music swell around her, being part of something larger than herself. The experience was overwhelming and exhilarating. She matched her playing to the orchestra's sound, listening and responding, creating a true collaboration. The orchestra moved through the Brahms concerto with Sarah, and something magical happened. The musicians, who had accompanied countless soloists over the years, found themselves genuinely moved by her playing. The principal violinist, an older gentleman who had been with the symphony for 30 years, felt tears forming in his eyes. This wasn't just technical mastery. This was music that spoke directly to the soul. Sarah lost herself completely in the performance. The nervousness vanished. The awareness of being judged faded away. There was only the music, flowing through her and around her, connecting her to every person in that hall. She executed the demanding cadenza, her fingers flying across the keys in passages that would challenge any professional pianist, then brought the movement to its powerful conclusion. When the final chord resonated and faded, there was absolute silence. Sarah looked up, suddenly aware again of where she was and what was at stake. Had she made a mistake? Had something gone wrong? Then Thomas stood up and the rest of the judges followed. They were applauding. The orchestra members were applauding too, tapping their bows against their music stands in the traditional show of approval from musicians to a soloist. Margaret Chen was shaking her head in amazement, a broad smile on her face. That was remarkable, Thomas called out from the audience. Sarah, I think we've heard enough. Would you please come down here? Sarah stood on shaky legs and made her way off the stage and down to where the judges sat. Her heart was pounding. She couldn't read their expressions clearly. Were they impressed enough? Had she done what was needed? Margaret Chen spoke first. Miss Mitchell, I've been conducting for 40 years. I've worked with some of the finest pianists in the world. What you just did up there, that wasn't the playing of someone who had a couple weeks to prepare. That was the playing of an artist who has lived with this music in her bones. How is that possible after such a long break from performing? Sarah thought about the question carefully. I think music never really left me, she said slowly. Even when I wasn't playing, I was hearing it in my head, feeling it in my heart. Every emotion I experienced, every struggle I went through, I was unconsciously processing it through music. When I finally got to touch a piano again, all of that came out. Thomas nodded. That's what we're hearing. Raw emotion combined with extraordinary technical skill. Sarah, we'd like to offer you the soloist position for our winter concert series. You'd perform the Brahms concerto, plus potentially 2 other pieces we can discuss. The concerts would be in 6 weeks, giving you time to rehearse with the full orchestra. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. Are you serious? You're really offering me this? Completely serious, Margaret confirmed. You're exactly what we've been looking for. Fresh talent with genuine passion. The audience is going to love you. They discussed logistics, rehearsal schedules, and the contract details. The payment they mentioned made Sarah's head spin. It was more money than she made in 6 months of waitressing. For playing music, for doing what she loved most in the world. When she left the symphony building that afternoon, Sarah felt like she was floating. She called her mother immediately, and when she heard the news, her mother burst into tears of joy. Years of struggle and sacrifice suddenly felt worth it. The dreams that had seemed dead were coming back to life. Over the next 6 weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparation. She quit her waitressing job, using her advance payment from the symphony to cover bills while she focused entirely on music. She worked with Margaret Chen on interpretation, refined her technique with the orchestra during rehearsals, and slowly built confidence in her new role. The other orchestra members embraced her warmly. They had heard about the viral video and the circumstances of her discovery, but they judged her solely on her musicianship. In their eyes, she earned her place through talent alone. The marketing department at the symphony promoted her upcoming performance heavily. They created posters with her photo, shared clips from her rehearsals online, and gave interviews about discovering a hidden musical genius. Sarah was uncomfortable with the attention at first, but she learned to see it as serving a larger purpose. If her story inspired even one person to pursue their dreams despite obstacles, it was worth the discomfort. The night of the first performance arrived. Sarah stood backstage in a beautiful black concert gown that the symphony had provided. Her hair was styled professionally, her makeup done. She looked elegant and polished, every inch the concert soloist. But inside, she was still the girl from Eastside, still the waitress who had been challenged to play at a party. She peeked through the curtain at the audience filling the concert hall. Every seat was sold out. Nearly 2,000 people had come to hear her play. Among the crowd, she spotted familiar faces. Her mother was there, looking proud and nervous. Thomas Brennan sat in the front row, beaming. Several journalists and music critics had prominent seats, ready to review the performance. Then Sarah saw someone she hadn't expected. Marcus Wellington sat in the middle section alone, looking serious and contemplative. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Sarah let the curtain fall back into place. He had reached out to her a few weeks earlier through email. The message had been short and sincere. He told her that watching her performance at his party had changed something in him. He had started questioning how he treated people, how he used his wealth and power. He asked if he could attend her symphony debut, not to intrude, but to witness her success and to remind himself that redemption was possible. Sarah had thought about it and replied simply that he was welcome to come. She wasn't ready to be friends with Marcus, might never be, but she could recognize that people were capable of growth and change. The house lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Sarah took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was thunderous. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench slightly, and waited for the conductor to raise her baton. In that moment before the music began, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. The losses, the sacrifices, the years of feeling invisible and overlooked, all of it had led to this moment. Margaret Chen raised her baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments. Sarah's hands hovered over the keys. Then the music began and Sarah disappeared into it. She played with everything she had, channeling years of emotion into every note. The Brahms concerto unfolded like a story, with all its passion and struggle and ultimate triumph. The audience sat transfixed, barely breathing, lost in the beauty of what they were hearing. This was what Sarah had been born to do. Not to serve wealthy people at parties, not to hide her light under the weight of circumstance. She was meant to create beauty, to touch hearts, to remind people that transcendence was possible. When the final movement built to its triumphant conclusion and the last chords rang out, there was a split second of silence. Then the audience erupted. People leaped to their feet, shouting and applauding. The ovation went on, waves of sound washing over Sarah as she stood beside the piano, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, she had claimed her place in the world she was meant to inhabit. This was only the beginning. The reviews came in the next morning, and they were extraordinary. The city's most respected music critic wrote that Sarah Mitchell was a revelation, a pianist who combined technical brilliance with emotional depth in a way rarely seen. National publications picked up the story. Within days, Sarah's name was being mentioned alongside established concert pianists. Offers began pouring in from other orchestras, music festivals, and performance venues across the country. Sarah sat in her small apartment, reading the reviews on her laptop, still struggling to believe this was her life now. Her mother sat beside her on the couch, reading the same articles on her phone, occasionally gasping at particularly glowing praise. "They're comparing you to Martha Argerich," her mother said, referring to one of the greatest pianists of the last century. "Baby, do you understand what this means?" Sarah did and didn't. Intellectually, she grasped that her life had fundamentally changed, but emotionally, she was still processing. Just 2 months ago, she had been serving drinks at parties. Now she was being discussed in the same breath as legendary musicians. Her phone rang. It was Thomas Brennan. "Sarah, have you seen the ticket sales for the remaining concerts in the series?" "No, what about them?" "They sold out in 3 hours. All 4 remaining performances. We're adding 2 more dates, and we're moving to the larger concert hall to accommodate demand. People want to hear you play." After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly for a moment. Her mother watched her with concern. "Are you okay, sweetheart? This is a lot to take in." "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "What if I can't live up to these expectations? What if the next performance isn't as good? What if people realize I'm not actually that special?" Her mother took her hand. "Listen to me. You've always been special. The world is just finally catching up to what I've known all along. You earned this through years of practice, through natural talent, and through never letting go of who you truly are even when life tried to bury it. Trust yourself." The words helped, but Sarah still felt the weight of sudden expectations. She had gone from anonymity to scrutiny overnight. Every performance would now be reviewed, analyzed, compared to the last. The pressure was intense. The subsequent concerts went beautifully, each one met with standing ovations and critical acclaim. Sarah's confidence grew with each performance. She was learning how to handle the stage presence, how to connect with large audiences, how to maintain her artistic integrity while meeting professional demands. After the final concert of the series, there was a reception for donors and supporters of the symphony. Sarah had learned to navigate these social situations, though they still made her slightly uncomfortable. She was talking with a major patron about her musical influences when someone touched her elbow gently. It was Marcus Wellington. He looked different than he had at his birthday party. Less arrogant, more humble. "Sarah, I wanted to congratulate you." That performance was transcendent. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice neutral. She wasn't sure what else to say to him. Marcus seemed to sense her discomfort. "I won't take up your time. I just wanted you to know that what happened at my party changed me. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the person I've become, the way I treat people. I've started working with a foundation that provides music education to underprivileged kids. I'm funding scholarships, buying instruments for schools that can't afford them. I wanted you to know." Sarah studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know that something good came from that night. You showed me something I had forgotten. That wealth and success mean nothing if you use them to diminish others. I'm trying to be better." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's good, Marcus. Really, I hope you follow through with it." "I will," he promised. Then he added, "I'm sorry again for what I did. I know I've apologized before, but I want you to know I mean it. You didn't deserve to be treated that way." "No, I didn't," Sarah agreed. "But it led me here, so maybe it happened the way it needed to." She paused, then extended her hand. "I forgive you, Marcus, genuinely." They shook hands, and Sarah saw real gratitude in his eyes. He nodded respectfully and moved away, disappearing into the crowd. Over the next year, Sarah's career blossomed beyond anything she had imagined. She performed with major orchestras in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. She recorded her first album, which received critical acclaim and strong sales. She was invited to prestigious music festivals in Europe, performing for audiences in Vienna, Paris, and London. But success brought new challenges. The constant travel was exhausting. The pressure to maintain her level of performance was relentless. She sometimes felt like she was on a treadmill that wouldn't stop. There were nights when she missed the simplicity of her old life, when she wasn't responsible to thousands of ticket buyers and critics and industry executives. During a particularly difficult week, when she was dealing with the stress of back-to-back performances and fighting off a cold, Sarah called her old catering manager. She asked if she could come by the catering company's kitchen just to visit. When she arrived, her former co-workers greeted her with excitement and warmth. They wanted to hear about her adventures, see photos from her performances, touch the fancy concert programs with her name printed in them. But after the initial excitement settled, they all sat around the prep table where they used to take breaks and just talked. "Do you miss it?" one of the other waitresses asked. "The normal life?" Sarah thought about the question honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I miss the simplicity. I miss not being recognized everywhere I go. I miss being able to play music just for myself without thinking about reviews or ticket sales." "But you're living your dream," another co-worker pointed out. "I am," Sarah agreed, "and I'm grateful every single day. It's just that dreams are complicated when they become reality. They come with pressures and responsibilities I never anticipated. I'm not complaining. I just needed to be reminded of where I came from. You all helped me remember that I'm still just me, regardless of what's on a concert poster." Her old manager smiled. "You were always too talented to be here permanently, Sarah. We all knew that. We're proud of you, and you're welcome here anytime you need to remember your roots." The visit grounded Sarah in a way she needed. She returned to her performing schedule with renewed energy and perspective. Yes, she had achieved success beyond her wildest dreams, but she hadn't fundamentally changed as a person. She was still the girl who loved music more than anything, who found joy in creating beauty, who understood struggle and appreciated every opportunity. She started incorporating this groundedness into her performances. Instead of trying to be perfect, she focused on being authentic. She shared her story openly in program notes and interviews, not hiding her background but embracing it as part of what made her artistry unique. Audiences responded to this authenticity. They weren't just coming to hear technical mastery. They were coming to witness someone who had overcome real obstacles, someone whose music carried the weight of lived experience. 2 years after her breakthrough performance at Marcus Wellington's party, Sarah stood backstage at Carnegie Hall in New York City. This was the pinnacle of classical music venues, the stage where legends had performed for over a century. Tonight, she would make her Carnegie Hall debut, performing a program of Chopin, Liszt, and Rachmaninoff. She was no longer the nervous, uncertain woman who had been forced to play at that party. She had grown into her role as a professional musician, developed stage presence and confidence. But standing here, about to walk onto one of the most famous stages in the world, she still felt butterflies. Her mother was in the audience, along with Thomas Brennan and Margaret Chen. Many of the orchestra members from her first symphony performance had traveled to New York to support her. Even some of her old co-workers from the catering company had pooled their money to buy tickets and make the trip. A stage manager appeared. "5 minutes, Miss Mitchell." Sarah nodded, taking deep breaths to center herself. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. They had all been necessary to forge her into the artist she had become. She thought about her father, who had died before seeing her talent fully blossom. She wished he could be here to see this. Then she realized in a sense he was. Every value he had instilled in her, every sacrifice he had made for their family, lived on in her and in this moment. The stage manager returned. "You're on." Sarah walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage to thunderous applause. The hall was packed, every seat filled with people who had come to hear her play. She sat at the beautiful Steinway grand piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She began with Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a piece that demanded both technical virtuosity and deep emotional understanding. From the first notes, it was clear that Sarah had reached a new level in her artistry. She had moved beyond simply playing the notes brilliantly. She was now interpreting the music with maturity and insight that came from experience and reflection. The audience sat mesmerized. Every phrase was perfectly shaped, every dynamic carefully controlled, every emotional moment honestly expressed. This wasn't showing off or trying to impress. This was music making at its purest. Between pieces, Sarah spoke briefly to the audience. 2 years ago, I was working as a waitress. I hadn't touched a piano in 6 years. Someone tried to embarrass me by asking me to play at a party, and that moment changed my life. It reminded me that who we are isn't determined by our circumstances. It's determined by what we carry inside us. I carry music. It's the truest part of me. Thank you for allowing me to share it with you tonight." The audience applauded warmly. Her honesty and vulnerability created an immediate connection. They weren't just watching a performer. They were witnessing someone sharing their authentic self. The second half of the program featured Liszt's Hungarian, Rhapsody No. 2, and concluded with Rachmaninoff's Piano Sonata. No. 2. The Rachmaninoff was particularly powerful. Sarah had chosen it deliberately because it was the same composer she had played at Marcus's party. But this time her interpretation had deepened. She understood the music on a level she hadn't been able to access 2 years earlier. When she played the final notes and the music faded into silence, the audience exploded. People leaped to their feet, shouting bravos, applauding until their hands hurt. The ovation went on for nearly 10 minutes. Sarah took bow after bow, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the response. She played 2 encore pieces, both met with equal enthusiasm. Finally, reluctantly, she had to leave the stage. Backstage, she was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, industry professionals, and journalists. But she asked for a moment alone first. In her dressing room, Sarah sat quietly, still wearing her concert gown, and let the reality of what had just happened wash over her. She had done it. She had performed at Carnegie Hall. She had proven to herself and to the world that she belonged on that stage. There was a gentle knock on her door. "Come in," she called. Her mother entered, her face streaked with tears. She crossed the room and pulled Sarah into a tight hug. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. They didn't need to. Everything they felt was communicated in that embrace. "Your father would be so proud," her mother finally whispered. "I know," Sarah said. "I felt him with me tonight." The reviews the next day were stellar. The New York Times called her performance transcendent, declaring that Sarah Mitchell had officially arrived as one of the major pianists of her generation. Other publications echoed the sentiment. Within hours of the reviews being published, her manager received dozens of new performance offers. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Sarah received a letter in the mail a week later, handwritten on simple notebook paper. It was from a 17-year-old girl in Chicago who had seen the video of Sarah's first performance at Marcus's party. The girl wrote that she had been about to give up on her dream of becoming a musician because her family couldn't afford to send her to music school. But Sarah's story had inspired her to keep fighting. She had practiced harder, applied for scholarships she didn't think she could get, and just received a full ride to a prestigious conservatory. She wanted Sarah to know that by refusing to let circumstances define her, she had given hope to others facing similar struggles. Sarah read the letter 3 times, crying each time. This, she realized, was the real purpose of her success. Not the fame or the critical acclaim or the sold-out concerts. It was inspiring others to believe in themselves, to fight for their dreams, to remember that circumstances don't define potential. She started a foundation using a portion of her performance fees, dedicated to providing music education and instruments to underprivileged children. She called it the Second Chance Music Foundation, because she believed everyone deserved a second chance to pursue their dreams, just as she had been given one. Marcus Wellington became one of the foundation's major donors. He and Sarah weren't close friends, but they had developed a mutual respect. He kept his promise to be better, using his wealth to create opportunities rather than to elevate himself at others' expense. 5 years after that fateful night at the party, Sarah performed again at a special benefit concert for her foundation. The event was held at a renovated community center in the neighborhood where she had grown up. Many of the audience members were children from the music programs the foundation supported. As Sarah played for those kids, many of whom came from the same kind of poverty and struggle she had known, she felt a completeness she had never experienced on any grand stage. This was where her music mattered most, not in impressing critics or wealthy patrons, but in showing young people that their dreams were valid, that their circumstances weren't permanent, that they had value and potential regardless of what the world told them. After the concert, children lined up to meet her, to touch the piano she had played, to ask questions about how they could become musicians too. Sarah took time with each one, looking them in the eye, telling them they were capable of extraordinary things. One little girl, maybe 8 years old, asked shyly, "Were you really a waitress?" "I was," Sarah confirmed. "And you know what? There's nothing wrong with being a waitress. It's honest work. But I had a dream inside me that wouldn't let go, and eventually I found a way to honor that dream. You have dreams inside you too. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for having them." The girl smiled, suddenly standing a little taller. That night, driving home through the city streets, Sarah reflected on her incredible journey. From the depths of struggle to the heights of success, from being invisible to being celebrated, from silence to symphony. It had been harder than she ever imagined, but also more rewarding than she had dared to hope. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, and every note she played, every performance she gave, every child she inspired was proof that dreams deferred are not dreams denied. They're just waiting for their moment to bloom. Sarah Mitchell had found her moment, and in finding it, she had helped countless others believe they could find theirs too. That was the true gift of music. Not just beauty for its own sake, but beauty that transforms, that heals, that reminds people of their own capacity for greatness. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah smiled to herself. Tomorrow she would practice because that's what musicians do. She would prepare for her next performance, continue building her foundation, keep pushing herself to grow as an artist. The work never ended, and she wouldn't want it to, because this wasn't just a career. This was her calling, and she would honor it for the rest of her life, grateful every single day that a moment of intended humiliation had become a doorway to destiny. Sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments. Sometimes what breaks us open is exactly what we needed to finally become whole.